When I was a young anime fan 20 years ago, I liked my translations as literal as they come. I loved my sans, chans, kuns, samas, and senseis. I loved my okasans, my oni-chans, my oyabuns. I liked my senpai to be kakkoi, bishounen, my imoto-chan tachi to be kawaii, and my senshi to be bishoujo. I didn't want cultural equivalents of when characters said very Japanese things. I wanted lengthy and abundant translator notes crammed on the screen with the subtitles so I could learn about the Japanese culture and not miss a single nuance. And as I watch videos made by anime fans and read the comments sections today, it's clear to me that many die-hard anime otaku nowadays still feel the same way I felt back then. But I'm older, wiser, fluent in Japanese, and I have been an anime and game translator professionally for years now, and my views on literal and localized translations have done a complete 180. If you prefer literal translations, I'm not making this video to mock you or to rant at you. I genuinely want to educate you. I understand that it's unlikely that I will change your mind in just this one video, but I encourage you to stick around and listen to what I have to say, and if you have any concerns or questions afterwards, to leave them in the comments section. And if you already agree with me and think that localized translations are the best, then go ahead, sit back, relax, and nod your head and smile, or you can show this video to someone the next time you're trying to convince someone why you like anime to be an entertainment experience and not a Japanese lesson. Let's get started. First, it's important to define literal translations and localized translations. A literal translation, in the most extreme sense, would be to break down a sentence word by word and translate everything like a dictionary would. Whereas, with a localized translation, the sentence is restructured and crafted to sound like it was originally written in English, rather than translated from another language. Think of it as the sentiment of the sentence is kept intact, while the individual words might change completely. Take this scenario. If you've seen a lot of anime and have paid attention when reading the subtitles, you might know that this means something along the lines of,
I like you! Please go out with me!
But that's not exactly a literal translation. If I were translating that literally, ski is an adjective that means favorable. Desu is a polite way of ending a sentence and is kind of like the word is, am, or are. Tsukiyatte is a conjugated form of the verb tsukiyau, which means to accompany or to come with. When kudasai, or please, is added to the end, it means please accompany with. So the entire thought, literally translated, is
favorable! Please come with me!
But Sarah, you're protesting, that's super literal. We don't mean that literal. Of course you can adapt idioms, and of course you can rearrange where the verb is in the sentence and add pronouns so people don't sound like cavemen. And you're right, there are varying degrees of literality in translations, and I'd be strawmanning you all if I claimed that all die-hard anime otaku wanted their translations as literal as humanly possible. But just like there are degrees of literality, on the flip side, there are degrees of localization. Remember the basic translation I gave earlier? I like you, please go out with me. Even that isn't entirely localized. Think to yourself, is that how people really sound when they ask someone out? Sure, maybe if the character's a little bit awkward or clunky, he or she might sound like that, but a more localized translation of that scenario might sound something like,
My darling, I have loved you since the first moment I laid eyes upon you. Hey babe, Netflix and chill? Wanna breed?
While the literal words can vary, by localizing, we can better showcase the character's personality, intentions, and emotions. It results in a better emotional connection between the audience and the anime. But Sarah, you protest, you can't deny that sometimes anime is too localized. Touché. A good example of more extreme localization is the DIC dub of Sailor Moon. This is actually what started my bias against localization. The plot lines were kept intact and the characters were generally true to form, but the exact content of their dialogue did not always match the original Japanese. Not only that, but some names and genders were changed, romantic relationships were erased.
They've entered the contest.
They're girls and cousins too.
Amara, Michelle!
Fantastic! You're the best cousins in the world!
And sometimes entire episodes were omitted. and I was appalled when I found all that out. To be fair, some of this was censorship, not localization. I hate censorship, and we'll get into censorship versus localization in another video later. But my point is that not all of the changes made in the DIC dub of Sailor Moon were changed to make it more North American, though many of them were. Take, for example, our heroine, Tsuki no Usagi. Tsuki means moon, and Usagi means bunny in Japanese, and in the manga, Viz translated her first name as Bunny. Bunny is an unusual name in English, but it's also unusual in Japanese, so it works okay. But the whole joke about bunnies living on the moon cooking mochi is lost on us, so the connection between bunny and moon just isn't there. We could have gone with our own lore, that the moon is made of cheese, and maybe named her something like, Brie? In the DIC dub, they made her civilian name Serena, which I actually think was a smart move, since it's a close variant of Serenity, as in Princess Serenity. But the point is, with extreme localizations, the dialogue isn't exactly translated line by line. Instead, the scenes are outlined, certain beats are hit, characters' personalities are generally kept intact, and the dialogue is sort of written from scratch. This is a similar concept to when Peter Jackson made a film adaptation of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He did not copy over every line of dialogue as is from the books, and he did not include every scene. In some cases, he changed or added scenes. He did what he felt was most necessary to adapt or translate, in a way, the book into film. Do I think extreme localization is the way to go? Of course not. Outlining a story beat by beat and composing a script mostly from scratch is great for things like film adaptations of a book or a reboot of a series, but it's not that great for sub or dub of an anime. I do think that it is important to keep the original writing intact and to not just make stuff up. However, there's more to translating fiction than matching the Japanese words with their English equivalents. You have to consider the character's emotions, motivations, and you have to also consider what kind of emotional response the show creator wanted her audience to feel when hearing each line, when watching each scene, and when watching the series as a whole. If you forget about the emotions and motivations of the characters, your words may be technically correct, but there might be, at times, an emotional disconnect with the viewer. No matter how much the Japanese voice actor is emoting, no matter how dramatic the background music is, and no matter how detailed the animators were.
セーラー V ちゃんなんてさ、テストも関係ないし、悪者退治なんてスカッとしそうだし、それに比べて私は。ああ、いいな。セーラー V ちゃんなんてさ、テストも関係ないし、悪者退治なんてスカッとしそうだし、それに比べて私は。愛と正義のセーラー服美少女戦士。
Now, at this point, I need to pause and point out the elephant in the room. I find that most anime otaku who complain that a translation is not literal enough don't understand Japanese. Which begs the question, how do they even know that the translations weren't literal enough if they can't even understand Japanese? Most often, they'll respond with something like, I heard that character used the kun suffix, but it wasn't in the subtitles, so this translation is wrong. But the literality of a translation goes beyond things like sama, sang, kun, senpai, surname first, first name last, etc. And I also need to point out that just because a translator omits things like san, sama, and senpai, that doesn't automatically make their translations localized either. Honorifics are just superficial things that some otaku like to fixate on and use as some sort of purity test as to whether a translation is literal, and therefore good, or localized, and therefore bad. But what is the function of honorifics, really? It's basically an easy way of showing how one character feels about another character, or to show what their power dynamic is. I do think honorifics are fun, and to this day, I still enjoy theorizing which honorifics I'd use with the people in my life if we were Japanese. But we're not Japanese. And it's very alienating, and screen cluttering besides, if we keep all the honorifics intact in our translations. A lot of people, even the otakuist of otaku, also don't know the subtle nuances of each honorific. It's kind of like using the wrong synonym in a conversation when you're trying to impress someone.
Oh, thank you for explaining that to me. Now I get it. You are so luminous.
And then we have to remember that anime isn't only for otaku. It's for everyone. Yes, everyone. Not just you. But what about niche series, you ask? Fair point. Obscure, nerdy, fan-servicey shows are probably not the best gateway anime for noobs. The otakuist of otaku are more likely to watch anime like these, so we should cater to them and make the translations more literal, right? I guess so? And Crunchyroll, for example, does often do things like leave in honorifics and keep their translations from sounding too localized. They know their base and they want to please their base and stay in business. But this still disappoints me. It's like feeding your child Kraft mac and cheese because that's what he's used to and he insists it's better than homemade. Because your homemade mac and cheese wasn't the right shade of orange, it can't possibly be proper mac and cheese without that classic neon orange color. But he's missing out on the true flavor of homemade mac and cheese with all its milky, cheesy nuances and the love and emotion that was put into making it. This is how I feel about anime translations that are overly literal. But Sarah, what about puns, you ask? And I say, challenge accepted. I could do a whole video on how to localize puns, and I probably will. But for a short explanation on how puns work, it's basically a word association game. If you need to make a pun about, say, apples, think of other words that you'd associate with apple, see if any of them are homonyms, and presto, you have a pun. Say a character is making a pun about an apple in a scene and says, "Ringo pudding daisuki da yo. Ah, puru puru oishii." That literally translates to, I love apple pudding. Ah, it's so jiggly and delicious. The ah and jiggly parts in Japanese were ah and puru puru. But when combined, you make appuru, which is the Japanese version of the English word for apple. But rather than translating it literally and losing that it was a pun, I could localize it as something like, I love apple pudding, so golden and delicious. Yes, I completely removed the word jiggly and replaced it with the word golden, a word that was never in the original sentence, but I kept the pun intact. Sometimes, yes, there really isn't a way to localize the pun, especially for characters' names, and it's really best to just let it go or maybe add a pun in elsewhere rather than clutter up the screen with translation notes. If you have to explain the pun, it's no longer funny. So that was my case for localization, why I feel it's so important, and why I think many anime fans are missing out if they obsess over how literal a translation is, and they forget about the heart of the story and the characters in the process. I also wanted to show that it takes much more than fluency in Japanese to be a good anime and game translator. The translator in question must not only have a flair for English, but must have a good understanding of how different people think and speak. At the end of the day, we're making a piece of media meant to entertain and emotionally move an audience, not to teach them Japanese. You can't, and shouldn't, try to do both. Unless you're, I don't know, a niche YouTube channel or something. And that was a good segue into plugging my Watch Sailor Moon, Learn Japanese series. I have a whole series of videos where I go through the entire first episode of Sailor Moon, 90s version of course, and break down the dialogue one word at a time to teach Japanese and really explain the essence of what everyone is saying and how they're saying it. This is not only a fun way to learn Japanese, but it's a great way to understand your favorite characters on a whole new level. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. I also do the same with some popular anime songs. I intend to keep using anime and games to teach Japanese in a more fun and engaging way, so feel free to join my community if that kind of content interests you, and if you want to take your understanding and love of anime to the next level. At this point, I really want to thank all of my patrons for supporting me on Patreon, especially my 3 newest patrons, Amanda, Amanda F, and Sarah. Great name, by the way. I release new videos on this channel every Tuesday and every Friday, so keep coming back and checking on me to see what I'm doing. And until then, bye!